How does one begin to justify emptiness? The complete and utter absence of things. Vacant rooms and void expanses of concrete. A vacuum. How does one stand in the presence of nothing? Ever since I was a child, I've always experienced this weird feeling when playing games like Silent Hill 3 or Cry of Fear, which I could only describe as a very deep-rooted dread in relation to the spaces they had crafted. The empty roads and subway stations of Cry of Fear, the dark and often reassuring save rooms in Resident Evil 4, even the Casino Delfino in Super Mario Sunshine. I always viewed these spaces almost as though they were stuck in some sort of stasis, waiting for my next playthrough, unchanged and unbothered by external factors. What I hadn't realized until a few years ago was that what I was feeling wasn't as much because of what these places represented in their own regard, but rather what they had left in their wake. This might get confusing fast, so let me get more specific. Outer Wilds is a good place to start. This game has been talked about to death, and yet not enough in my opinion. It's one of the best open world exploration puzzle games in recent years and holds a very, very special place in my heart. Emptiness in something like Outer Wilds is handled very differently than most of the other entries we'll be discussing today, but I feel like it's still very relevant in understanding the nature of that feeling of dread I was talking about. Now, Outer Wilds plays a lot with the idea of outright not telling you anything besides basic controls. This allows the game to really decide whether or not it wants to omit specific things without coming across as too weird or like it's trying to conceal information. Every planet is full of things to discover. Everything is packed into these small, quite literal spheres of information. Every single new thing you discover leads into the next one and so on, which makes the voids in between that much more interesting. So when you first enter Dark Bramble, or you accidentally fall into the black hole in the middle of Brittle Hollow, or end up on the surface of the Interloper staring at Giant's Deep, there's this great sense of emptiness. Like, there sure is a lot of nothing here, and how beautiful is that? In Outer Wilds, the desolate parts of its solar system turn dread into wonder. And so by intentionally omitting details about its world and obscuring parts of itself, Outer Wilds lets you fill those voids with your own imagination. The same is true in the very opposite direction as well. You see, the palace in Echo is really interesting. The halls of the sentient superstructure that is the palace are unmatched in terms of evoking a feeling of uneasiness. The hallways stretch for miles with no end in sight. The palace is pretty much infinitely deep and frighteningly compact at the same time. The longer you play Echo, the more you feel like you might as well have been traversing a different version of the same room for the past 2 hours, and yet the palace isn't there for you. It's just there. You walk to the end of an hallway that you thought would lead you somewhere, and it's just empty. To a better, and perhaps best effect, Signalis shines the brightest in terms of existentialism. Everything from the red expanse that is the deserted planet your ship crashes on, to the shore in Elster's visions, Signalis really doubles down on its existential dread. When playing through the game, in a very similar fashion to how Outer Wilds intentionally omits information, I found that the sporadic visions that flash on screen throughout the game are often plagued by this one sentence. This space intentionally left blank. Now, Without getting too much into Signalis' story, reason being, the plot of the game is fucking insane. The only context you need to know is that you play as what the game calls a replica, an android imprinted with human memories, your only purpose being a self-inflicted one, to carry out a promise once made to a love interest. Replicas are not supposed to love. It is prohibited by their makers, and the punishments are harsh. And yet, they do. This space, intentionally left blank, almost acts as sort of a repression mechanism. Whenever emotions that are too strong emerge, the sentence manifests. Primarily used in books and documents, this space, intentionally left blank, is supposed to tell a person that the blank page isn't a printing error, but is actually intended to be void of text. In very much the same way Signalis leaves blank spaces along the way. Memories are disjointed and pieces of the puzzle to completing the story are missing, not because of an oversight, but because it was intended as such. In a more physical sense, Peripeteia's world achieves the same exact thing through its monolithic architecture. The world in Peripeteia is big, but very barren. Staircases stretch for hundreds of meters above you, and rivers of waste flow far past where the eye can see. An elevator ride lasts uncomfortably long. In Peripeteia, there are systems and roads and doorways which help you traverse, but they are not mandatory. The world has very little restrictions when it comes to exploring it. This also comes with a lot of nothing, like a lot of nothing. If a place looks out of bounds, rest assured, it probably isn't. Like, it's baffling the amount of nothing that is in Peripeteia, and yet just how intentionally designed it all is. Those aforementioned not out of bound spots, they have staircases and bridges and pipes that interconnect, leading you to more empty warehouses, dead ends of metal and rubble. They lead you to violent rivers and monuments of an alternate universe brutalist Poland. The game is far from perfect, but the complete disregard for any sort of conventional modern level design standards and, at times, the jankiest gameplay one could experience absolutely do not undermine, but actually help the game create this vibe that is only usually felt when standing at the edge of Prahlow, or riding the elevator in Signalis, or walking through the infinitely stretching hallways of Echo's palace. To leave a space intentionally blank is not to conceal information, or to limit one's experience or understanding of art, for in the process, a blank space becomes filled with nothing. And what things does nothing have to tell us? Also, remotely blowing up cars is kind of awesome.